Welcome to Highwind 2020. Both to those of you who have checked in, who are with us here in the audience in Stavanger, but also to those who are following us virtually from your home. And I have to say that unfortunately last night we had to send out an email encouraging some of you to stay at home if you could. This is a precaution because of the increasing contamination in the populations. And our health minister asked us to be part of the dugnad, so that was our contribution. And this decision was made in close cooperation with the city of Stavanger. But is there one thing that we've learned over the last couple of months is that things happen. And we need to be flexible. So we will make sure that the content and the in-depth knowledge on offshore wind will not be influenced by this. And for your information, we have more than 250 people following us digital from their home offices. I have to say, I'm really proud that this region has stand together and developed this project as a cooperation. The city of Stavanger has been in forefront, but it's been a great pleasure to work together with the Chamber of Commerce, ONS, which I represent, the sponsors, DNB and Nessa Bank, the energy clusters of this region, Innovation Energy, Norwegian Energy Solutions, and Norwegian Offshore Wind Cluster, in addition to Greater Stavanger. So thank you to all of you. Before we start discussing the topic of the day, we need to do some housekeeping rules. Number one priority is you and your health, and your families and your colleagues. So you've gotten a dedicated chair today. Please keep it, remember your number, and do not switch chairs. You're also divided into two zones, blue and yellow. Keep it throughout the lunch and breaks. And remember, it's actually your responsibility to keep the distance while we mingle afterwards in the breaks. And before COVID-19 started, we always mentioned emergency alarms. So we must remember to do that as well. Nothing is planned, so if the alarm goes off, we need to evacuate the building. But why are we here? We live in a world of great uncertainty. And today, we're actually most conscious about who wins the US election. But I don't think we will know the answers. And while we wait, we are going to discuss offshore wind. We are here because we are curious and interested in exploring opportunities in the offshore wind market for Norway and for Norwegian suppliers in all markets. We are gathered here because climate change demands us to see cleaner energy solutions, and Norway is an energy nation who has been punching above its weight for quite some time. And why? Because we've been able to have the nature-given resources, we have been smart when it comes to resource management, and we have sound frame conditions. But now we're standing on the verge of new energy in the industrial adventure. And we need to find out how to handle it, how to make it happen. What are the synergies between oil and gas and traditional oil and gas and the new offshore wind? How will future value chains look like? And what should the politicians do in order to help this adventure go forward? We have a long list of distinguished speakers with us today, and one thing the COVID-19 situation has learned us is to innovate in concepts. So today we have a mixture of live on stage, record on tape, live digital, live Q&A, people in the audience, and so on and so forth. But I also see a great list of people who are here in the audience, but also home in your offices. And you make this conference. So go in to slido.com. Slido.com and ask your questions. You find the code here. The password is hashtag HW2020. So we need your questions as well. Before I go any further, I need to introduce myself. My name is Ingvild Meland. Normally, I'm the program director of ONS, but I'm here to host you through this day. We're in Stavanger. And I know there's a willingness to make this a central place to do offshore wind for the future. The mayor of Stavanger, Ms. Kari, Nessa, Nordtun, is here to welcome us. We look forward to, and Kari, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ingvild. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to Stavanger and the very first High Wind Conference, High Wind 2020. Stavanger has a long tradition for hosting conferences. And as Stavanger Energy Capital, I think it's about time that we made a move and established a conference for offshore wind. Don't you agree? It's about time. Due to the development of the situation over the past 24 hours regarding COVID-19, as Ingvild told you, both nationally and in Stavanger region, we had to make a last-minute change. And that means that many of you who were supposed to be here today, physically, now is following us digitally. Still, I'm very happy that we can carry through with the conference as well as having a large number of digital followers. Amongst them, both universities of Stavanger and Bergen, as well as Dalane College, where they educate wind power electricians. And many of you are probably also following the US election. Very exciting. And in a true Stavanger spirit, the conference is organized with a broad collaboration, and I would like to thank everyone who is involved. The Stavanger Chamber of Commerce, the ONS, Norwegian Energy Solutions, the Norwegian Offshore Wind Cluster, Energy Innovation, and with important support from DNB and SR-Bank. Thank you so much, everyone. The energy sector is facing big changes. The Norwegian oil and gas industry intends to achieve a 50% reduction in absolute greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 2005. And then secure a further decline to near zero to 2050. And I must say I'm very pleased with yesterday's front page paper in our local paper, Stavanger Aftenblad, where Equinor's new CEO promises that the future for Equinor is green. High Wind 2020 aims to give us all an update on the offshore wind segment, both on national markets and international markets. And even if we are in the midst of a global pandemic, the fact that we keep up our speed and get together to address how we can make a difference and ensure the transition to a low carbon society, that makes me optimistic. The history of Stavanger has always been like the ocean industries, with the herring fishes, canning, shipping, seafood, and of course, offshore oil and gas. We have been blessed an abundance of energy resources in Norway, and Stavanger is situated in clusters of diverse energy-related industry and productions. For more than 100 years, we have been a leading region for hydroelectric production, and we have Norway's largest infrastructure for production and use of biogas. Stavanger is also at the outskirts of one of the largest installed base on onshore wind in Norway, with excellent wind resources, even if it's sometimes a little too much for someone. The next chapter in our energy saga is also linked to sea. Using our competence and infrastructure from almost 50 years of oil and gas production to take a position in the offshore wind market, as it moves forward from the coast into deeper sea waters. And with contenders like Aker and Equinor signed up for the race, I think we have a good shot. With our energy-related supply chains, the southwest of Norway has a very good starting point for creating a new industrial adventure. The opening of offshore seas areas for wind power is just around the corner, and with the development of Sørlige Nordsjø II and Utsira Nord, the latter being just outside the Stavanger coast, I'm really looking forward to seeing the results. Stavanger will work closely with all the stakeholders in the region that are already involved in offshore wind, or who has an interest in approaching this new market. We will support the industry into this new area of opportunity, and I will do what I can to facilitate and establish new jobs and profitable industry both nationally and, of course, here in our region. I am now looking forward to an exciting day with great speakers and interesting discussions. I don't expect that we will have all the answers here today, but I do expect that we will obtain important knowledge, make connections, and exchange ideas. And most of all, I expect that we take these ideas and make them into action and concrete plans for a new energy capital and a sustainable future. Once again, welcome to Stavanger and to Hywind 2020. I wish you all a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kari. I'm glad to hear you're optimistic, and I'm glad you challenge the industry to really be part of the next chapter for the offshore wind here in Norway. And also, you mentioned some companies, but I'm glad you point out that kind of the energy, don't think about the energy transition, be the energy transition. And we need to mention that there are a lot of companies who've already taken a position in this market. You look at Able, I think their offshore wind revenue was more than 9 billion last year. Equinor has taken a position. You have smaller companies like Automation og Data who really found a position. And when we are going to develop an industry back home, we need to have companies who's been out there, tested the market, built experience. So I'm really glad that we have companies also from this region who has already taken a position. But building on that, what are the potential? What are the Norwegian ambitions? Last week, our Minister of Petroleum and Energy, Tina Bru, she stated to the Norwegian media E24 on a discussion on offshore wind, it's because I want us to succeed that we need to take the difficult decisions and discussions. And that was relating to international cables of power. Tina Bru, we talked to her yesterday. She sent us this video. Unfortunately, she's occupied in the parliament today, but we look forward to hear her reflections on live on tape. Please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you today in Stavanger, but my duties in the parliament had to come first. But I hope a few opening remarks will underscore the significance that the Department of Energy and I set for offshore wind. What you are discussing at Hywind 2020 is finding solutions to combat climate change. But it is also about businesses, jobs, industrial activity, and of course, value creation. Today, THEMA Consulting will present their report on opportunities within offshore wind for the Norwegian industry. A report which is a part of the bigger picture. And the message is clear. Offshore wind has the potential to become a new industrial adventure. But in many ways, it already is an industrial adventure. Actually, it's Norway's largest renewables export when it comes to goods and services. We must use this momentum going forward. How can we use the competence and technology from the oil and gas industry to develop new solutions for offshore wind projects in the future? And as for the road ahead, the Norwegian government will provide support in many different ways, such as, for example, opening dedicated areas for offshore wind projects along the coast, using well-known support schemes like Enova, facilitating research and technology development through a brand new research center, and financing a new industrial initiative that explores how companies can become more integrated in business models for the offshore wind industry. It is all about how we can develop better solutions with lower costs and new technology. Because Norwegian companies are already competing and winning contracts in the global markets, and we need to keep this edge going in the coming years. Let me also take the time to acknowledge a part of the support team behind these efforts and results. Our export financing system, Eksportkreditt Norway, and GIEK, and of course, NORWEP, Norwegian Energy Partners. And of course, my hometown of Stavanger and Rogaland County, with many other partners along the coast. In the years ahead, we want the industry to keep up the momentum, to cut costs and explore global opportunities. And that is exactly what our policies aim for. This industry will create jobs. It will draw on our knowledge of the seas, and it will grow using the people, capital, and technology that 50 years of offshore oil and gas exploration has given us. This county and this coast have a gold medal in seizing new opportunities, and I believe we will surely seize this one as well. Thank you so much for your attention, and I wish you the best of luck with today's conference in beautiful Stavanger.
I think we can say that we wish her also the best of luck when she goes into Parliament today. So, thank you, Tina. It's interesting to hear that they've already taken a lot of efforts to make the offshore wind industrial venture to start. And she mentioned new acreage. As you know, in the beginning of next year, acreage will be open for applications, research center, financing industry initiatives, and the aim is to create jobs. She mentioned early in her speech, she mentioned a report, because today is actually a new report being launched about the market potential of offshore wind, both in international market, but also how Norwegian, the market potential for Norwegian suppliers going into those markets. She could not be here with us today, but this report is produced by THEMA Consulting, and behind this stands the ministry. It's the Norwegian energy partners and the Eksportkreditt. And this is the time I want you to log into slido.com, because now we start asking the questions. And the password is still #HW2020. It's a great pleasure to have with us the author of the report. And this is the first time this report will be presented. Marius from Rennesund, he's the partner in THEMA Consulting. He will address what decides how much value the offshore wind adventure can bring to Norway. What will it take for Norwegian companies to succeed? And how are we looking at international markets versus Norway? I think we're ready to see the movie, and after the movie, Marius will join us live for questions here in the audience. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for letting us come here to present this analysis that we've done together with Multiconsult and Renewable Consulting Group Nordic on Norwegian opportunities in offshore wind towards 2050. The offshore wind industry has developed rapidly over the last decade, and we've seen a very rapid technological progress, and we'll try to illustrate that on the graph on the left-hand side, where you see the average turbine capacity within new projects over the last decade, and we've seen more than a doubling of average turbine capacity over that period. We also know that there are significantly larger turbines also coming online in projects over the next few years. And this rapid technological progress have pushed costs down within the offshore wind industry. And that lower cost combined with clear political targets has led to investments within offshore wind, particularly in Europe. And you can see that on the graph on your right-hand side. And we see that UK and Germany have had significant capacity installed. But we also see that China is definitely a growing market. Of course, there has been subsidies involved to kickstart this sector, But over the last few years, we've seen that more and more projects within the bidding rounds now bid for a zero subsidy level, which basically means that offshore wind is reaching grid parity, although there are still some additional implicit subsidies in terms of grid connections, etc. When we are to look at the opportunities going forward, there are two main questions that we've looked into. The first question is what determines the global growth in offshore wind volumes going forward? And a key here will definitely be the climate policy globally. We've seen in Europe the Green Deal, where we have a target of being carbon neutral by 2050. We also see that China now has an ambition of being net zero carbon in 2060. We've also seen, particularly across Europe, that several countries now are phasing out their fossil fuel power generation by regulation. Germany is one example of that. And with a net zero emission target, we need to see more electrification of new sectors, and that will increase the power demand in Europe and elsewhere across the globe. And offshore wind will be one important technology that will take some of that demand growth together with onshore wind and solar. But both those two technologies face some challenges when it comes to areas that can be used. And we've also seen, particularly in the Nordics, for onshore wind, a increasing opposition. So offshore wind will definitely be a key technology going forward. Economic growth is, of course, also an important factor for the development in power consumption, mostly so in countries in transition like China, for example. The link between economic growth and power demand has been broken in more developed countries, where, for example, energy efficiency play a major role. The other part of the equation and the other questions that we looked into is what that determined Norwegian companies' market share within this market. And we have a well-developed oil and gas and marine industry in Norway, and it's important that they're able to adapt at an early stage. They have the necessary competence to meet the needs in offshore wind, but they need to adapt it to a new segment, to a new sector and new business models. We also see that economic and political barriers to entry can be a decisive factor in some areas. We see that it might be difficult for Norwegian companies to get a share in the Chinese market, for example. We also see that there are requirements for local companies being within this sector and developing projects locally. I think also that's fair to say that there's opportunity for a first mover advantage within this market, both in bottom fixed offshore wind, which is the more mature part of offshore wind, but definitely in floating offshore wind. And it would be advantages with a functioning home market where you can test technology and develop and do R&D that can be used globally at a later stage. If we first turn to the first question, what do we think about the global development in offshore wind capacity? We see that we expect capacity to grow over the next 10 years from between 25 and 30 gigawatts installed today up till 250 gigawatts. Beyond 2030, we see a very rapid growth, and we expect total installed capacity to be around 1,300 gigawatts in 2050. And we also see that it's after 2030 that we really see floating offshore wind developing fast. If we look at the global distribution of capacity that you see on the right-hand side of the slide, we see that Europe will maintain its leading position and have a large market share in the short to medium term, but that China and Asia in general will grow as we move towards 2030 and beyond. So we expect a significant growth in offshore wind, both fixed and floating, with Europe in the front seat in the short and medium term, and Asia growing in the longer term. So when we looked at this, we have developed a set of scenarios to see what the turnover for offshore wind, the offshore wind sector in Norway could be from the period today and up until 2050. And our base case is a case where Southern North Sea 2 and Utsira North are being developed. We see sufficient interest and funding is achieved to establish an emergent supply chain for floating offshore wind. Spending in the oil and gas industry continues to fall, and we expect in this scenario spending in renewable technologies to continue according to the stated plans in the Norwegian supply chain. And in the world where this scenario happens, we expect to see a gradual increase in the turnover for Norwegian companies within this sector, reaching 7 billion euros in 2050 in the base case. We've also looked at two different scenarios. We have what we call the accelerated growth scenario, where offshore wind deployment is happening quicker than anticipated in Norway, so we get a home market up and running at an early stage. Policies are put in place to accelerate supply chain developments. The oil and gas supply chain and maritime sectors are able to transform to delivering products and services to the offshore wind sector at an early stage. And offshore wind farms are becoming part of a wider offshore grid, allowing for interconnectors to several countries. And that's an area where we're seeing a lot of focus from the European Commission lately on so-called hybrid assets, wind farms with connections to more than one country and more than one area. Within this scenario, we have a faster growth in the turnover for Norwegian companies, which reaches 10 billion euros around 2050, so a significant growth in that scenario. We've also developed more of a conservative scenario called slow progress. In that scenario, offshore wind deployment in the Nordic goes slower, partly due to delayed electrification of new sectors, particularly transport sector and industrial sectors. The activity in the oil and gas sector persists, which results in less interest from investors and supply chain in the renewable business. And we've also in this slow progress scenario assumed that some unexpected adverse events have long-term detrimental impact on investments in new technology and in the Norwegian supply chain. And in this more conservative scenario, we'll get a turnover for Norwegian companies within the offshore wind segment around 3 billion euros when we are at the later stages of this analysis around 2050. So to sum up, we are facing a transformation of the energy sector globally. The backdrop here is the European Green Deal with the carbon neutral Europe by 2050, which see China is also developing their net zero emission ambitions. These ambitions and emission reductions calls for a rapid electrification of the society, and that will increase electricity demand. And we expect offshore wind to take a large part of that increased demand. We see that Europe is at the forefront in the offshore wind development, will be for still some years, but Asia and particularly China is expected to grow significantly. And we need to grasp the opportunity we have here and now in the short term to be a first mover, which can give us advantages further ahead. And we find that the turnover in the offshore wind sector from Norwegian companies can be as high as 7 billion euros in 2050 in our base case. There is a further upside in what we call the accelerated growth scenario. It might also be a further upside if the growth in offshore wind will be even faster than what we have anticipated in this analysis. And in short, this sector has the potential to be one of Norway's most important industries in the years to come. So on that note, I would just say thank you for listening. We have seen that the offshore wind industry has a positive outlook and can be important for Norway going forward. Thank you very much for the attention, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Marius, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. I mean, I'm here to ask the questions, and you're here to give the answers. So first of all, congratulations with a great report. This is your premiere, isn't it?
Yes, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting work to do. And this is a sector where a lot is happening, and I think it's going to be important for Norway going forward. So it's been exciting to work with this.
You've been working with this report in quite difficult circumstances when it comes to kind of making plans for the future when we are in a COVID-19 situation. Do you have any reflections on what kind of a pandemic situation will have on the outlook for offshore wind?
Well, that's a difficult question. Obviously, the situation is very much evolving as we speak. What we've seen is, of course, this kind of uncertainty is not something investors are very, very happy with on one side. And we're also kind of afraid that the government will lose focus on the energy transition, and that could be not too good for the offshore wind sector. But so far, I think it's been more or less the other way around. We see that a lot of those support packages coming online, especially around Europe, is very much focused on this energy transition moving forward, the electrification moving forward, and the renewable Europe moving forward. So I think all in all, I'm not too afraid of the COVID-19 situation for the development within this sector. It might take some more time because right now everything is very turbulent. But in total, I don't think it's too negative what we're seeing.
But I think you're saying that you put the climate change policies on top of your kind of risk list or kind of opportunity list. How would you say that different outcomes on what we see actually today would influence the developments, but in general, kind of the international global climate policies being developed?
I think that is key. I think the investors need to see that there's still a focus on the energy transition, and they get some certainty by seeing clear environmental policies, seeing that the framework conditions is put in place. The Green Deal in Europe means definitely a lot. I think the European Union have been very clear on their targets and do change the framework conditions to facilitate this transition. You see China as well being clearer on their zero emission policy for 2060. So I think that's definitely important. I mean, we're in the midst of an election in the US as well, still open there, as I understand. And I'm not an expert on US policy, but as Trump has taken the US out of the Paris Agreement, of course, I think it would be fair to say that it would be advantageous with Biden having at least a clearer environmental policy and focus on that going forward.
Good. We've got some questions here from the audience as well. One of them is, where do you see Norway's expertise bringing value to offshore wind industry, and where do you see foreign companies bringing value to build a strong local industry?
No, I think there are some key segments that we're very well positioned in. I think turbine installation is one area where we can definitely create value. Foundation installation and supply as well of foundation. We've already taken positions in that segment, and we will continue do so. Marine operations in general, I think, is also areas where we can create values, and cables. And it might be, possible to take even larger market shares within the floating wind segments. I see that, for example, the IEA says that about 40% of the supply chain is quite equal to the oil and gas sector. So that's as well an area where we can definitely develop. I think on the more difficult areas, turbine supply is something where others definitely would add value, and I don't think we see a large market shares for the Norwegian supply industry.
I know Siemens Gamesa is here in Jorsen, so I think they're happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Another question: how do you transfer your billions of euros in potential to gigawatts, and what are the equivalent expected capacity to be installed in your report?
No, the capacities we went through, and we will see a very large increase going forward. From today, we have around 25 to 30 gigawatts, increasing to 250 in 2030, and further to 1,300 gigawatts in 2050. Of course, the cost will also decrease, and that's a prerequisite for us getting as high installed capacity. We need to get costs down. The typical learning curve arguments also support that. So the turnover will be less and less per gigawatt going forward, but still with this rapid increase in installed capacity, that's where we can increase the turnover for the Norwegian industry. What we see is that Europe, where we have a solid position and are expected to continue to have so, is increasing much in the short to medium term. In the longer term, Asia and particularly China will be important. And I think it has shown to be more difficult to get into the Chinese market. But if you are able to take some market shares there as well, that could definitely create an upside to this scenario.
Mm. Last quick question. You mentioned the global market opportunities, but there's a question here on what do you see as the most likely or attractive main markets for the power potentially produced from the offshore wind Norway? I mean, I know that's a difficult question because we don't know where to put it maybe and how to create value still. But what's your reflections?
No, I think offshore wind is needed across Europe. We see a lot is happening in the UK. They've had a focus on it. There's a lot of capacity installed. I think Germany as well can be a main off-taker. There are some grid issues within Germany. It's difficult to transport the electricity from north, where the onshore wind conditions are good and where the offshore wind will come ashore, and down to the southern part where a large part of the industry is situated. So there need to be some developments as well on the power grid within Germany. But I think Germany and the UK are two key markets where we can contribute.
Thank you, Marius. Thank you for your presentation and for your good answering the questions. I wish the best of luck with your report, and I hope that there's a media here that will give you the attention that you deserve. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're moving over to a new topic. Or actually now you really need to take out your phones to go to slido.com because we are going to ask your questions, which we'll come back to later in the day. So the first question, that this is a polling, you will get the results in the end of the day. We want to test you because the first question is, according to the IEA, the International Energy Agency, what will be the offshore wind share in the electricity mix in Europe in 2050? And you're giving a range of opportunities, alternatives that you can answer. So while you do that, that will be open for a short while. You find that, and you can also continue to ask the questions as we move along. The alternative is 10%, 15%, 25%, and 35%.